Canada has always been a trading nation and in the most recent phase of globalization has signed on to free trade agreements with countries all over the world. What's been somewhat less enthusiastically pursued is free trade within our own borders. As non-tariff barriers limit, for example, British Columbia's wine coming into Ontario or Quebec's beer going to New Brunswick. Joining us now for a look at interprovincial trade in the nation's capital, Craig Alexander, Senior Vice President, Chief Economist at the Conference Board of Canada. And here in our studio, Rafael Gomez, Director of the Centre for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto. Rafael, good to have you back on the program. Craig, nice to see you in the nation's capital as well. And why don't we just leave it there? You just saw the interview with Shachi Kurl from Angus Reid. Anything, Craig, you want to follow up on based on what you heard from her?
Well, I don't think the results are surprising. When it comes to pipelines, it's a very divisive issue because I think Canadians view there being a trade-off between the environment and the economy. When in point of fact, I think that we can achieve a balanced approach, but I think Canadians find it difficult to basically pick a side on this issue. The other dimension is, I'd love to see a survey where we actually ask the question to Canadians, should Canada be dependent on selling all of its energy only to the United States? Because that's really what the issue around pipelines is about. It's about getting the energy outside of North America. With the ongoing discussions with the U.S. on NAFTA, I think it highlights an example of why you don't want to be just dependent on one marketplace. Plus, from a growth point of view, the growth in energy demand is going to come from the world economy, not just the United States. And so Canada needs to be able to get its energy to tidal waters so that we can tap global demand. But at the same time, we do have to balance environmental concerns, and that's why you need to have good environmental regulations, but you also need to make progress in eliminating or hitting the greenhouse gas emissions targets the government has set. But the key thing is, if we actually put a price on carbon and reduce emissions and hit our environmental targets, there's nothing inconsistent with building pipelines.
So that's a yes to the pipeline, just to be clear.
Yeah, just to be clear.
Just to be clear. Okay. Anything you want to follow up on, Rafael?
I think I echo a lot of that sentiment. I mean, probably not surprising that we saw the country evenly split. But what was also surprising from those figures is how that kind of countrywide split masks regional differences, which is really what we're talking about here. How these regions have persisted despite having a federation for 150 years. And they have strong weight in terms of determining policy and public policies in general.
Well, tell me this. Why should anybody in the province of Ontario care about the status of a fight over pipelines between Alberta and British Columbia?
Well, I think the implication was we probably care less than Albertans and BCers do, or people closer to the decision point. But to the extent that we do face questions about the trade-off between environmental concerns and our economic growth, I think that resonates with people. But I also think, if you did have a more adult conversation, say, with our populace and explain to them the sort of ramifications and dimensions of these issues, I think you might have different answers, as was sort of mentioned by Craig. Having debates framed around different possibilities than the kind of black and white issues that are framed, we'll say, by the media, because that's who dominates the space, absent public discussions in a kind of more robust civic democracy. The country that comes to mind is Norway. A country like Norway, fine, it doesn't have the regional differences we do, but it seems to do very well in terms of exploiting its natural resources without exploiting the environment. And I think people there have come to terms with the fact that they're sitting on huge reservoirs of energy that won't last forever. They take huge amounts of money from the extraction of oil that they reinvest in ways that I think Canada has sort of lagged behind. I think because we haven't had those discussions at a national level.
I think the last few premiers of Alberta actually have come through Ontario to make the speech that you guys should care about this because there's jobs in Ontario if we get these pipelines built. Norway's not bad at the Olympics too, are they?
It's another point.
That is really quite something.
There you go.
Craig, let me get you back in here to ask about the wine tit for tat. When you heard that the Premier of Alberta was going to respond to what, in her view, was intransigence from the British Columbia government, her fellow cousins in the NDP government in British Columbia, by denying access to the Alberta market for BC wines, what went through your head?
Well, first I was surprised, but once I thought about it a little bit, it suddenly made a lot of sense. What the Alberta government did was effectively choose an industry that economically wasn't going to be too damaging to the BC or the Alberta economy, and basically put restrictions on entrance of BC wine to make a strong point that, if you're going to hurt our economic prosperity, we can hurt yours too. My second thought, though, as an economist, was just absolute despair over the fact seeing provinces fight with one another on interprovincial trade issues. This is something that economists have been railing about for forever. As part of the challenge in our federation is that because of rules, regulations, standards, certifications that provinces put on things, you create frictions in terms of doing business across borders, when in point of fact, the foundation of the Canadian Federation was supposed to ensure that this doesn't take place. And it costs the economy. So, I think that it highlighted usefully the fact that we do have challenges on interprovincial trade barriers, and I think that Alberta was really trying to put the screws to BC to say, hey, if you want to have a fight over this, we will have a fight. The other thing is that when it comes to interprovincial infrastructure, which pipelines is part of, this is a federal responsibility, and I think what Alberta was doing was it was sort of upping the stakes in order to try and drive the federal government to the table to take a stand that, the Trans Mountain project did get approval by the federal government cabinet to move ahead. It did go through a rigorous assessment, and the federal government deemed that this is a project that should go forward, and it is a federal responsibility. So it does show the challenges of the Canadian Federation.
Rafael, this whole wine dispute between Alberta and British Columbia has, I think, highlighted the fact that a lot of people don't know that there are significant interprovincial trade barriers within this country. It seems unusual that, the governments of Canada over the last 30 years have signed free trade agreements with countries all over the world, dozens of them, and yet we still have these barriers persisting within our own country.
Yeah. Why? Why? The question, I think, goes back to the Confederation. We were essentially independent colonies of Britain that at one point decided to devolve or evolve powers to a federal authority. But if those powers weren't expressly stated, everything else was retained within the provincial remit. And the fact we have such a diverse geographic extent of our country, reaches coast to coast, and diversity in language and institutions, adds another layer of these sort of perennial questions of rights and responsibilities. Just as a sort of contrarian view, though, many of the restrictions that do exist in Canada pertain, as I was alluded to, over the movement actually not of goods. Most goods and services actually do flow pretty freely across provinces, more services. So construction services is like one classic example, or even nursing and teaching. Anything that requires a certification to practice has often been a barrier to movement. Over time, I must say this is one of the things that, again, under the radar, probably people didn't know unless they were in those professions and tried to move 20 or 30 years ago. Over time, those professions have come to terms with the reality that, a standard in British Columbia is pretty much equivalent to a standard in Ontario.
Well, let me follow up with Craig on that, because that is interesting. My hunch is people understand that if you get a medical degree in a developing country, you may have to and probably should have to recertify in whatever province you want to practice in Canada to make sure that the local governing bodies think your skills are up to scratch. But Craig, explain to me why it makes sense that if you're let's say a registered massage therapist in Saskatchewan, that somehow you should not be allowed to practice that trade in Ontario because you haven't been vetted by some Ontario college. How does that make any sense?
Well, it doesn't make sense unless there are differences in the provinces with respect to laws or requirements for that particular profession. But over time, what's happened is, we have a situation where professionals can't easily move across the country seamlessly. Now, there have been efforts. We've seen parts of the country, like agreements between Ontario and Quebec on certain professions. We have, out in Western Canada, there was an agreement that involved several of the provinces to try and harmonize certification standards and recognize each other's professionals. But the real fundamental question is, why do you have that across the country at all, right? It it does create a barrier to the movement of labor. It also comes at a time when businesses are reporting that they're having skills shortages, and so this could actually intensify skills shortages. So there is a cost associated with the regulation certification requirements by occupations that differ across the country.
Yeah,
I was going to say, labor is your thing. So you tell us whether it makes sense to have so little, quote-unquote, free trade in the labor market in the country.
Well, what I was going to point out is a bit of a good news story. I mean, take nurses, for example. Nurse associations across Canada had been working for over 2 decades to make the process easier for nurses who have been certified to practice, say, in Ontario, working in BC. So that's pretty much been achieved nationally. And that's a big and a very important profession, especially in the future.
So if you do get your nursing degree in the province of Ontario, you can go and practice in British Columbia without having to recertify?
Pretty much across the country, nurse associations have allowed nurses to have that mobility and flexibility. Yeah, that's a big, I think, win. But on the other side, we can't forget, certifications and occupational associations have arisen because of demands, in a sense, from the public, but also from the members themselves to preserve quality. And indeed, in some services, even as a consumer, you don't even know whether the quality is good or not. You've been given a medical service, say dentistry or something else, and did they actually do the job? So we rely on these professional services to maintain quality, especially in very vital areas like our health. So again, to play sort of devil's advocate, we do want to retain those standards and not at the cost of some sort of found efficiency that might appear from the mobility of dentists moving from one region to the other. I think that's just one view.
Well, let me raise another example. There can't be a more Canadian example than beer. So let's try that. Craig, I think I remember a time, might be 30 years ago, where if you were a brewer and you wanted to sell beer in Ontario, you had to actually make that beer in Ontario. And if you, for example, were manufacturing schooner beer in the Maritimes, you couldn't sell it in Ontario because you weren't making it in Ontario. Now, I don't think it's that way anymore, but it was once upon a time. How much does it cost the Canadian economy when you have examples like that of what seem to be antiquated trade rules within our own country?
Well, the interprovincial trade barriers, which really are not barriers, they're more like irritants. They have a cost associated with them. Businesses that jump through the hoops and go through the processes can ship their goods and services across the country. The problem is that the process often will cause a cost associated with them. So, for example, beer bottle sizes will differ in different regions of the country. When one Ontario craft brewer wanted to enter the Quebec market, it cost them $100,000 and took them 8 years to ultimately get access to the Quebec market. And so these sort of barriers are costing the economy. Now, we don't have a precise figure. The Bank of Canada estimates that it's between $2 and $4 billion a year that's lost because of restrictions. There's been some academic work that has said that if you take a broad perspective, the cost to the economy is in the neighborhood of $50 to $130 billion. And this is something that a Senate report in 2016 highlighted, that they actually favored the higher number, like something in the 50 to 130 billion range, as being the cost to the economy. And it has to do with duplication of regulations. It has to do with inconsistent laws and inconsistent regulations. And some of the examples are depressing but entertaining. So one of them is that there are truck classifications where these vehicles are only allowed to drive at night in BC, but they're only allowed to drive in the day in Alberta. To be a travel agent in Ontario, you actually have to be a resident of Ontario to be a travel agent. There's a lot of examples of where the regulations either are different by province or costly to abide by. And then there's actual outright prohibitions. So, for example, in only 3 provinces can you direct sell alcohol to consumers, but the rest of the provinces you can't. And a good question is, why do we have these inconsistencies? And if we remove them, it would actually help to promote growth. It would help businesses to scale. It could increase investment. It could help productivity and innovation in the marketplace by creating more competition. I mean, there's a lot of gains to be had by making the Canadian market more open within Canada.
Okay, Rafael.
Well, there's just a bit of an X factor, though. You're right. Some of these rules and regulations stifle innovation and the ability for high-grade products moving from one region to the other. But technology has done a lot to undo what these regulations were trying to do, which is stop the flow of goods and services. So today, say, take a professional, an architect. You need to be resident in you have an architectural practice in order to build or construct or design something in the province in which you're working. Of course, with technology, you can make deals and you can provide that expertise in a way that the regulation is now kind of moot. So I would say over time, what tends to happen with kind of regulations that have no other function seemingly than to protect a vested interest, they tend to dissipate over the long run, either by technology or by some other form. It's when they have this offsetting benefit to safety, to quality, or to equity that I think we should look twice and not just think we're going to have this nirvana of free trade and everyone will benefit. No. I think we do have to look carefully at which standards are in place because they might have an efficiency cost in the short run, but which have these equity or quality standard benefits.
Well, fair enough, but Craig, let me go back to that beer example again. I guess one can understand how a particular government of any particular province might want to protect its beer industry from imports from other provinces' beer industries in order to protect the jobs of the people who are in that brewing business in that particular province. But I wonder if you've done any studies over the years or if you've heard of any of whether that protectionism, in effect, prevents the market from getting bigger, which might create more jobs for everybody at the end of the day. I don't know. I'm spitballing here. You tell me.
No, we know that that protectionist measures stifle competition and growth. And it also tends to increase prices that consumers pay. So just as there's enormous benefits for Canadian businesses to do trade outside our borders, there's benefits to opening access to markets within Canada. And for many businesses, Canada is a big market. Like, we tend to think about Canada as a small economy because we're always comparing ourselves to the United States, but Canada is the 10th largest economy on the planet. And so there's a big market here that, small and medium-sized businesses want to tap to grow their business. And barriers and restrictions being put on them in terms of limiting their ability to grow within Canada have an economic cost. And quite frankly, when it comes to the beer industry, when you think about, we want to protect it because we want to help grow our domestic craft business, if the domestic craft business is good, it's likely able to compete well against other brewers within Canada and brewers outside of Canada.
Now, again, Rafael, if the unemployment rate were high, again, you could understand why some provinces wanted to say, well, we're not going to risk anything right now. Our unemployment rates are too high. We're not going to mess around with this. But the unemployment rate is, relatively speaking, pretty low right now.
Across the country. Yeah.
Across the country. Would now not be the time to kind of experiment with more free trade within the country?
Well, I think we have to separate a couple of things. Free trade for goods, products, most of that has happened. We don't have barriers to most of the goods that are trading right now.
It's services and labor.
It's
really
mostly services and labor. Now we have these one-off industries, alcohol, because traditionally Canada has regulated the sale of alcohol, as we know in our own province here in Ontario. And it's those regulations that allow you to have non-tariff barriers, all these regulations stipulating bottle size, which keep you out of a market, fine. But in terms of goods, most goods can trade pretty easily across the country. And I think that's probably a good thing. On services, though, I think that's where the challenge comes, because in part, these are industries or sectors that in sort of economic language are sometimes called credence goods, meaning the credential matters in order to determine the quality. We've given over, this is kind of an interesting experiment in sort of Canadian history, given over the power to regulate most of these credence sort of sectors to the bodies themselves, to the professional associations, which is kind of an intermediate model, right? We're not allowing markets to decide, because markets could presumably fix every problem. If I have a problem with a dentist, he's not certified, he does a bad job with my mouth, I post his kind of information on the internet, and no one ever goes. This is the market's mechanism, right? But we wouldn't want that in terms of public health issues. So, and then we have regulation, which is a top-down sort of government creating laws and having inspectors going around and maintaining regulation. So we have this in-between model where we have professional associations that create bodies and standards to certify into a market. The highest form is the sort of certification to practice, where you are actually criminally liable if you practice without the certification. There are kind of tiered levels. You can certify title, which means you could do the same thing, you just can't call yourself say a professional trainer. And then there's just pure licenses that give you a title, but anyone can practice whether they want use the title or not. So these kind of layers have been created and have emerged in a way like a market itself. It's solving a market problem.
Are
which
they
is
still in the public interest, though?
Well, I think so, because there's a market problem. They've emerged because there are aspects of that service that we're not 100% sure is of the quality we want.
Okay.
So we've given over this challenge of certifying quality to these professional bodies. And I think that's the thing you don't want to lose, at the same time allowing people who have the standards to sort of work anywhere in the country.
Craig, I'm literally down to my last 30 seconds here. Let me just ask you about the United States. Do you know if they have the same kinds of problems among the states that we have here in Canada, among our provinces?
I'm not quite sure about the United States, but I think one of the criticisms is that we have more restrictions in Canada than they do in the European Union, and that's a collection of countries, not just states and provinces. But what's interesting is we had the Canada Free Trade Agreement signed in April of 2017. And this was designed to remove the barriers to trade in goods and services across the country. What was notable about it was in a 330-page document, there was 167 pages of exceptions so that provinces could still put in place limitations on free movement of goods and services and labor. And I completely agree. We do need appropriate certification, regulation, and standards in this country. I think the goal is what we want is harmonization across the country, so we don't have different regulations depending by the region.
Well, let me jump in and say I have appreciated the free flow of ideas between Ottawa and Toronto this morning. You two were in great harmony. Thank you to Craig Alexander from the Conference Board of Canada and Rafael Gomez, Centre for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the U of T. Until next time.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.